What Killed Michael Brown is an Eli Steele documentary film that was recently released in mid-October of this year. Now, chances are, if you've heard anything about this film, it's about Amazon deciding that they were not going to allow this due to their terms of service to appear as an option for free view for Prime members. Now, I didn't really have much interest in this film based on the title alone because I've covered Michael Brown way too many times on this channel. In fact, if you were to rank the things that I've done as a YouTuber here on the internet.com, debunking Michael Brown would be right up there with numerous multiple "Sean, it's too much already" responses to the Young Turks. However, I'm actually glad that I did stumble across this film. I'm glad that Amazon went out of their way to ban it because it gave me an opportunity to watch it, and to my surprise, and this is a positive surprise, the movie doesn't just rehash the same information that I'd put forward in my multiple videos debunking the narrative around Mike Brown. Not that I don't think it's important to still talk about and still dispute the facts of the Michael Brown case, because so many people are still lying about them, and it is a foundational case for the Black Lives Matter movement. I know some nerds out there are going to say that BLM started due to Trayvon Martin. That's fine, but Trayvon Martin wasn't shot by a cop. He was shot by a random private citizen. When Black Lives Matter really became Black Lives Matter, it was due to the case of Michael Brown. So it is important to refute, dispute, and debunk and torch people on the internet with your words who spread Michael Brown misinformation still to this day. They should be shamed and embarrassed for it. However, this movie kind of goes beyond that. It actually really isn't that much about Michael Brown. It's oddly an incredibly empowering movie for Black people to watch. Like, if you were to boil this movie down into what it actually is, I'd say it's about 15% the Michael Brown story, 15% about Ferguson, Missouri, and then 70% about what Black people have done in the past that proves that they don't need help from white guilted liberals. So yes, we are in the hilarious position where Amazon, the multinational corporation, has barred a movie from being available to view for free, included with your Prime membership, because it's too empowering for Black people, and it talks about all the achievements that they've made over history, and how their progress isn't helped by white progressives that are condescending to them and treating them like victims who can't do for themselves. That's the movie that Amazon Prime didn't want, because they don't lie about Michael Brown, and they use his case as a framing device to get to this point. Now, like I said, while the movie really isn't about the Michael Brown case, it's really used as more of a framing device to communicate other information that the filmmaker wants to get across to the audience and highlight other more interesting, less heard about stories. That doesn't mean that when they do talk about the Michael Brown case, they're not really adding anything interesting or compelling. In fact, just the opposite. While in my videos, I harp specifically on the forensic evidence as it relates to the Michael Brown case, because the forensic evidence clears Officer Darren Wilson and proves that he told the truth beyond any reasonable doubt, this filmmaker focuses a lot on the individual witness testimonies, the people who actually told the truth about what happened with Michael Brown, and it actually includes reenactments or dramatic readings of their testimony which describe what the people actually saw who were there and told the truth about the case. And you had one of the people who witnessed this incident first think that when Michael Brown reached into the car punching Darren Wilson, which is corroborated by the forensic evidence, and Wilson fired in the car in order to defend himself, he believed at that moment that he just witnessed a cop being murdered right in front of him. That's how aggressive Michael Brown appeared to this witness. Another witness, whose testimony is contained within the Department of Justice report, expresses confusion at the actions of Officer Darren Wilson. Not confusion on why Officer Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown, but confusion on why Officer Wilson waited so long to shoot him and shot him in volleys in between yelling stop and other commands at him when Michael Brown clearly had no intention of stopping. Now, I know a lot of you hear the witness or the non-witness, Michael Brown's friend, and that's the story that went around the world about how this officer shot him repeatedly with his hands up, stood over him, and then shot him again when he was dead on the ground.
Put his hands in the air, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots.
Some witnesses have also said that they actually saw you stand over him.
That'd be incorrect.
That's total nonsense. Again, that's his friend, and it's been completely disputed, debunked, and outright proven to be a lie by the forensic evidence. But it's interesting to see what the other witnesses that actually told the truth, the ones who are actually there, actually saw, and how they describe what happened on that day on that street. And this film does provide that to us. It also talks about how the lies spread so far while the officers were still processing the crime scene. It also talks about the anger that built up while the officers were processing the crime scene because they didn't want to disturb the body in order to get the proper forensic evidence in order to determine what happened. So essentially, proper procedure in investigating a crime, or what was potentially a crime, which turned out to not be a crime, actually angered the public. Meanwhile, if they would have actually moved Brown or covered him or augmented the position of his body in any way, shape, or form prior to the experts arriving, that would have been used against them as a form of impropriety. But it's actually more interesting than the case of Michael Brown himself, because this goes into Eric Holder and what was going on in Ferguson overall at the time of the shooting, just prior to the shooting, and just after the shooting. And that's a lot of stuff that I just don't include in my videos where I break down the case, because they're not really relevant in terms of guilt or innocence to the circumstances of the case. But they are important and they are compelling. Like, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is at the time, the mayor of Ferguson, Missouri, was this man. Obviously, you can see, and for those of you who like to listen to YouTube, this man is a white man. And when Eric Holder decided that he was going to personally go to Ferguson as an attorney general and as a black man, again, his words, not mine, Eric Holder actually refused to meet with the actual mayor of Ferguson because he was a white man. He brought in mayors from other cities that had nothing to do with Ferguson who were black men, so when he showed up, he could be seen meeting black leaders while arriving on the scene. Now, considering Holder was going there to assess the job that the Ferguson police were doing and the Ferguson local government was doing, it's really odd that he had no intention of meeting with the actual person in charge of the Ferguson local government. And you actually get to hear the perspective from this mayor, who was mayor at the time, who requested to meet with Eric Holder, only to be refused based on the color of his skin. Now, this perspective that Eric Holder brought with him to Ferguson when he was there specifically to investigate the Michael Brown shooting may have led him to open up that broad investigation into the Ferguson Police Department, because the Michael Brown case was clear and obvious for anybody on the inside that was actually looking at the evidence, an open and shut case that 100% would clear the officer. And this explains why Eric Holder went digging through the Ferguson police, and he ended up getting them, or maybe getting them, on the fact that supposedly their traffic stops were racially biased. Now, hearing the mayor of Ferguson at the time explain what Eric Holder actually found and juxtaposing that to Eric Holder's report, which he had to have released the same day that the Michael Brown report came out, is absolutely fascinating, because his defense on the police stops, which again, if you guys weren't familiar, the big accusation to come out of this was Ferguson's population is 67%, but 85% of the traffic stops were done to black people, therefore racism. His response to that was, Ferguson is not an island. There is no rule that only the residents of Ferguson would be the people driving through Ferguson. In fact, neighboring black areas that are more proportionately majority black than even Ferguson are also areas that don't really have close grocery stores. Ferguson had the grocery store, so they would have a lot more traffic coming into their area from minority populations and specifically black populations. So the mayor of Ferguson actually had an explanation and an adequate defense against these charges. And in fact, when he brought this to an independent examiner that determines whether or not organizations have racism, he said, yeah, as long as they can't prove any bias, just the gap isn't going to be enough for them to call your police department or your town racist. Little did he know that that's exactly what Eric Kohler did. He said that there was no explanation other than racial bias that could have led to this disparity. Now, I never spent a lot of time going over the details of the ticketing practices Department of Justice report on the Ferguson Police Department, because I find that people tend to bring that up as a dodge once they've been beaten down over and over again about the overwhelming evidence that clears Officer Darren Wilson of any wrongdoing in the Michael Brown shooting. Because the way I see it, it has nothing to do with Officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. The Ferguson police could have had the worst ticketing practices in the entire nation. That still doesn't make any of the forensic evidence that proves Officer Darren Wilson's innocence any less compelling. But it's interesting that this film actually does take the time to go into this report and give you the other side of this report so that you can actually think about it for yourself when you might encounter that talking point. Now, another thing that this film spends a lot of time talking about that you just never really hear about post Michael Brown and the Black Lives Matter movement is the state of Ferguson and how it is actually significantly worse post the shooting of Michael Brown and the uprising of Black Lives Matter, despite the fact that a bunch of nonprofits that are currently raising money off of George Floyd actually got their start in Ferguson due to the death of Michael Brown. You actually see people in Ferguson who had their businesses destroyed, who had their town destroyed, who saw all this money flowing to all of these nonprofits, wonder where that money went, because it definitely did not go to Ferguson. You have these people talking about how they just packed up and moved to the next city and left them with the ruins that their community once was. You also hear about the past history of Ferguson, and instead of this like apartheid state that had a white mayor and was aggressively stopping black citizens, you find out that the history of Ferguson is a hub for the black middle class in the United States of America. That the people who are white that live in the city of Ferguson are not the evil white racists. They all left during white flight. These are people who embrace their community, a community that again has a significant black middle class.
Since the 60s, whites have lived under the accusation that they are racist.
Ferguson really became kind of a destination city for successful African Americans.
We were not part of white flight.
No. Some people want to be angry at someone.
That's one of the more interesting things that was tucked in this movie, because I never heard of Ferguson, Missouri until the Michael Brown incident. And I'm sure a lot of that is true for a lot of you out there. Unless you're local to the region or actually live in Ferguson or have been through there, it's likely you never heard of it, so you don't know what the situation on the ground was. You just know what the media was portraying to you. And to have somebody actually go there and interview people from all walks of life in the city of Ferguson and them tell you that this is not what is being shown to you in the media is absolutely fascinating and compelling, and an angle I never would have thought of to take with the Michael Brown story. And honestly, it was that same feeling of watching this movie and thinking, wow, that was a really clever angle to take on this story, a good perspective to get in order to tell this separate but connected part of the story that I felt throughout watching this. There were just a ton of instances like that, and things that I never would have thought of because, again, I focused on the main event and not every lie that happened to be surrounding it. As for what in this movie doesn't meet Amazon's community guidelines in order to be a free-to-view option on their Prime Video service, honestly, it has to be political. There's no other explanation than it's political, because this film is overwhelmingly respectful to Michael Brown. It is respectful to his family. It calls his family wrong, but it does say, you know, they're grieving for the loss of their child. Nobody goes out of their way to insult them. They don't glorify Officer Darren Wilson. And again, a huge portion of this film is talking about ways that black people have lifted themselves out of poverty in the past, and ways that they can do so going forward. And people in communities like Ferguson, but not specifically Ferguson, who go in there and do the work in order to help people transition from lives of criminality or lives vulnerable to becoming criminals into productive members of society. Like, they interview a woman in Ferguson who goes house to house to tutor students in order to get them up to speed in school so that they can graduate high school and have a better chance at gaining that economic prosperity. They go to a pastor in Chicago who goes to get people that just got out of jail and get them on the right path, providing them jobs and works and just things that make them better and more productive members of society. And the Chicago pastor, that guy's no joke. He decided that he was going to open his church in one of the worst parts of Chicago, one of the areas that are most known for shooting, in an effort to turn that around. And that's because he believed it was on him to improve his community. Now, you can see where this is going. There is a conservative perspective of the film that Black people should do for themselves, just like all people should do for themselves, and not rely on the handouts of the government, because that ends up trapping them in cycles of poverty. And if it's things like this that violated Amazon's terms of service, then the Overton window has moved way further than even I imagined, because it's a standard conservative argument and in no way extreme that self-reliance is the best way to lift yourself out of poverty. And it's actually supported by the numbers, specifically with Black people, specifically in this movie. In 1940, the Black poverty rate was over 80%, close to 84%. By 1960, the poverty rate had dropped below 50% to 47%. This was done at a time when the government was not only not helping Black people, but actively discriminating against them in the law. No, you didn't just mishear me. Nearly 40% of Black Americans in this country lifted themselves out of poverty in a little bit over the time from somebody's birth to after they graduated high school. That happened in this country during the Jim Crow era. So whenever a far leftist tells you that Black people can't succeed because the white oppressors won't let them, keep that in mind. They can do it. They don't need your help. And that is a consistent message throughout this film. They can deal with hardship, and you looking down on them and saying that they can't is your bigotry of low expectations. And it's that specific message of empowerment that is the overall theme of this movie. Now, I do recommend this movie. However, I will point out that it is only available for purchase on Amazon for $20. However, according to the website of the filmmakers, they get about 50% of your purchase money. Now, if you do this through Vimeo, they get 90% of your purchase money. So if you are going to watch it, I am going to link to the Vimeo link because I think that they should get a bigger portion of your money than Amazon, the company who decided that this movie's message of empowerment was not suitable for their platform because it didn't conform to left-wing ideas of what Black people should do according to white progressives. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As usual, if you like the video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media sites. They're all linked in the description. Support me via the support links. Till next time.